From Detroit, Michigan, I'm Laura Bonnell. I have two daughters with cystic fibrosis.
From Ontario, Canada, I'm Beth Vanstone, and I have a daughter, Maddie, with cystic fibrosis.
And I'm Patty Tweed of Manitoba, Canada. My son, Devin, has CF.
Regardless of the country, CF moms can relate and support one another. This is our Mums to Moms podcast from Canada to the United States.
Love we have is all we're fighting for.
I'm Laura Bonnell, the founder of the Bonnell Foundation, living with cystic fibrosis. My daughters, 26-year-old Molly and 23-year-old Emily, have cystic fibrosis. Patty and Beth are across the Detroit River in Canada or close by. Besides fundraising and advocacy, what we have in common is that we are raising children with cystic fibrosis. And Beth, why don't you introduce yourself and then Patty will.
Hi, I'm Beth Vanstone. I live just north of Toronto, Ontario in Canada. I'm raising two daughters. The youngest, 19, has cystic fibrosis. And we've been trying to live our best life despite CF for the last 19 years.
And I'm Patty Tweed, and I come from Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is the province directly to the west of Beth. I am the mom of men now, and I have two sons. Brian is going to be 40 this year, and Devin is 38, and Devin lives with cystic fibrosis. When Devin was born, I was the dietitian at a CF clinic, so I have that perspective as well.
And we have so much experience, so much knowledge, so much understanding of one another, and that's why we came together. And Beth, you had this great idea to bring moms together because we have so much in common. So kind of tell us about your vision. And that's why we kind of decided to start this podcast to kind of kick off what we're doing and hopefully engage more people.
Well, it's really funny because I've been a personal trainer for years and thought for many, many years how as CF moms, we're often on the bottom of our list. All moms have a hard time, and when you add chronic illness to that, it just moves you further down the list, and you almost feel guilty putting time into yourself. And I made a post, I think, a couple months ago where I decided that I was putting myself back on the list again and started walking. And it was so interesting. I had both Laura and Patty reach out to me saying, yes, yes, we need to put ourselves on the list. And we had a few meetings and we talked. And as CF moms, we know that quite often we're way at the bottom if we even make that list. And we just thought that CF moms deserve more. We need to talk and see how we can get up the list and make sure that we're making a beautiful lives for ourselves despite a diagnosis of cystic fibrosis. So I think we can bring that to you, hopefully.
Absolutely. And Patty, we all just connected right away. Wouldn't you say? I mean, they're such a bond already, and hopefully we're friends forever.
Oh, absolutely. And it's because there's so much that just doesn't need to be said. I mean, you don't have to just be talking about the superficial pleasantries. We just get right to the things that are important in our lives because the rest of it we know. So we can just start sharing from a really genuine place, I feel.
And I think it's always interesting to people and important to talk about diagnosis, like when our kids were diagnosed and then how we went from there. Mm-hmm. So Patty, why don't you start briefly just about how that went and then kind of what your thoughts were in raising your son, Devin?
Sure. Devin was actually diagnosed shortly after birth when he was having some difficulty and was really struggling right after he was born. I asked for a consult to my colleague who I worked with in the CF clinic, the pediatrician that was the head of the clinic. And I said, if there's anything wrong with my son, it has to be you who takes care of him. And Brian said, I know. And I think he did know at that time, although Devin wasn't diagnosed for about 10 days after that. But from the very beginning, to be honest, I think I knew more than I wanted to about CF. And it was hard for me to go to grand rounds if the subject was CF or whatever. But in retrospect, I am so thankful for the extra knowledge that I've had and the support that I've had from colleagues along the way. So we start from where we are and we go from there. And I was very, very grateful for the support from the beginning from people in the CF community in Saskatoon at the time. We were living in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Did you feel like you were meant to be there at any point?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you were working in the CF clinic, right?
I know.
I mean, what are the chances of that?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had many occasions to think, yes, you're in the right place. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Hard as it is, but, let's just go with this and we'll figure it out as we go. I just heard about a book the other day called Everything is Figure Outable. And I thought, yep, could have been written by a CF mom.
Absolutely. And what did you feel when you were thinking about Devin's future and how you were going to raise him? Did you think you're going to keep him in a bubble or you're going to let him do whatever he wants?
Somewhere in between, for sure. And as I say, it's pretty much trial and error. But both my husband and I felt really strongly that we wanted to raise our boys in as normal an environment as possible. And the best way to do that, we felt, was to kind of counteract the helplessness that you feel in the face of such a great challenge, to roll up our sleeves and get to work. And so from very early days, we had CF rolled out on our dining room table. We were, taking part with the community in problem solving and fundraising and doing all of those kinds of things. But at the same time, we were also making sure that we were, hiking in the mountains with Devin in a backpack. And he started fundraising with us when he was 6 months old because he was in our swimathon and he swam, I think, 50 laps with me just on a flutterboard.
Is he 35 now?
He's 38. He will be 38 in September. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And then Beth, what is your story?
So Maddie was diagnosed at 8 months. So it was a lot of back and forth to our general practitioner who, for sure thought I was a bit of a nut bar because as a mom, and it was my second child. And so I kept going back and forth. And finally, we were sent to a pediatrician who put Maddie in hospital right from her office with her first pneumonia. From then, she was in probably a month or more every year. So I was thinking of this today, and it was kind of profound, I think. I said, I was thinking about this podcast, and I'm thinking, at first you need to make peace with the disease coming into your life. And then you have to fight like hell.
Yeah.
Because you can't hate the disease that comes into your life because you're going to hate your life, I think, So you kind of have to make peace and say, okay, this is what it is. Now, what can we bring to it? So like Patty, I was on the phone with CF Canada, finding out how we could help. Let's get this done. Let's be part of a solution. Maddie rode horses. She still rides horses. She was scooping horse poo in the barn. We were careful. She didn't do a lot of playing without washing her hands 50 times, kind of like COVID things right now. That was just part of our life forever. So we were never reckless, but we always let her be herself and live a life. And we didn't want our life to be about CF. It was a part of our life, but it wasn't going to be all about CF. And we definitely wanted to be part of a solution and making things better, like a lot of the people prior to us did. We're just part of the process, right? Working on somebody else's work. So, and, the girls have done well, and I'm proud of both of them, the women that they are. So,
because you have two daughters. Maddie's the youngest, correct?
Yeah, so Maddie's the youngest, and my older daughter's just finishing. She'll be starting her final year of Teachers College next year. And I'm sure this will be something we will talk about in another podcast, is the shadow sibling syndrome, which is something, you have two girls with CF.
Right.
So you have other different challenges having two, but there's also a challenge coming with one that's in the hospital and getting a whole lot of attention all the time for being sick, and the other one that's kind of doesn't know where their place is. So
absolutely,
I'm sure that's something that a lot of moms are experiencing, and at some point in one of our shows we can address. So,
and did you diagnose Maddie, or how did that come about?
So our first case of pneumonia, the pediatrician said, we should really, they always want to rule things out, right? So I was good with that. Let's rule it out. However, a lot of the things that I had read, because of course, Dr. Google knows everything.
Right.
She didn't, yeah, right. She didn't fit into a lot of the categories, So I'm like, I thought she's okay. Like I wasn't going to go down to sick kids. I really was trying to avoid. I was in the land of denial until my mother-in-law called and said one of my husband's cousins had passed away from CF at 32. And I was like, you know what? We really got to go through that door now. We went down. We still were very much expecting a negative that she didn't have CF. I think a moment that's locked in my brain is I used to work out every day, Monday to Friday, and I was at the gym 4 days after her sweat test. And my husband walked into the gym, and it was so bizarre because I didn't think he even knew where I worked out because the gyms were closing and opening. And he walked in, and I said, "What's wrong?" And his eyes just filled up, and he started to cry in the middle of the gym. And he said, "It's Maddie." And I'll never forget that because he was standing there. He's the big workman guy, in his work clothes and his work boots. And It was like, wow, here we go. So that was the beginning of our journey, talking to the pediatrician, saying, drive very carefully when you're coming, we have a lot to talk about. So, yeah, that was the start of our journey.
Wow. Sort of similar to mine, I guess. So Molly, she tasted salty and we thought, wow, that's kind of weird. And the dog was always licking her foot. And then I was reading about cystic fibrosis because we remembered seeing something on television about Kiss Your Baby. And we were like, was that diabetes or no, was that cystic fibrosis? And then I read about cystic fibrosis and Molly had every symptom. So I called the pediatrician. She's like, oh, you're a first-time mom, go back to work. And, your daughter's fine. So I was like, oh, all right. So I ignored it for a couple of weeks. And I guess I really didn't ignore it. I guess that's the wrong word. I listened to her. Then I read more and I called her back and I said, she needs to be tested like tomorrow. So they tested her and I was, a reporter at the time. I was on a breaking news story and she called me. She's like, pull over. And I'm like, I know what you're going to say. She has cystic fibrosis, and she did. And we're still friends with that pediatrician. I just talked to her last week. She still apologizes for misdiagnosing. But so we did that. And, my husband had 7 siblings and I had 2. And we were going to have this family of 6 kids or maybe 4, but we wanted a bigger family. And now we were like, oh, my gosh. So we cried that day. And then we thought, well, we've got this disease. Now what do we do? And we just decided she's going to live. And then with our second daughter, we thought, naive at the time, still in the beginning stages of CF, how could this happen twice? We're going to have one more baby. In vitro wasn't, an option for us. So we thought we're going to have another child. This baby, second baby, couldn't possibly have CF. We couldn't have 2 with CF. And then we did. And the girls know this story. And then we decided, well, that's it. So, yeah, we just decided kind of the same thing. We are going to raise them to live life. And I know you can all agree that it's really set the tone, right? You're so grateful for life and you're so happy for our kids, even though they go through hell, but they're really living life. Mm-hmm. And then, this is something we talked about is how do you all handle this mentally? We're dealing with so much, and research and studies have shown that it's actually harder for the CF mom than the child who has CF mentally. What do you do to keep sane and keep going?
Such a big question. And really, I guess, besides doing a heck of a lot of personal development work, I've really wanted to, make sure that I could keep myself physically well and to the best of my ability, do that. And I knew how to do that. So that was kind of helpful. And really, it's about learning to let go and to understand that, every mom feels that desire to protect their child. And that is kind of writ large for those of us who are CF moms. But I found a little quote that was on my fridge for years, actually. And I found it really helpful. And I would go back to it every day or two. It said, a mom is not a person to lean on. but a person to make gleaning unnecessary. And then I would forget that. And then I would come back and I would say, oh yeah, that's what we do. Finding that fine balance between giving your child a safety net, which every child needs, but not a cocoon, and being able to figure out, okay, so at every stage that's a challenge for every parent, there's an extra layer that is, and we're dealing with CF too. So how do you provide that loving safety net and still let your child muck the barn, or like live life the way they choose to? I still remember one time when Devin and 4 of his buddies, they were all 10 and they were all runners. They were athletes and they were going to run in the Manitoba Marathon, the relay, not the marathon, but they were each running their little piece. I was worried sick because it was a really, really hot day. And I just thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to let my child do this? Well, I will be forever grateful to one of the dads who was a marathoner, and he ran beside all the kids.
Oh.
So he ran a full marathon, but he made sure that nobody had heat stroke, whether it was the kid with CF or his buddy. And so we just kind of did that. A lot of it was a mind game. You just kind of keep talking to yourself and learning to let go
and get through.
Yeah.
Beth?
It's been a journey, and there's ups and downs. There's really tough times, and then there's fabulous times. And in the tough times, I've gone to people and sought some help to sort out my feelings and to be able to deal with the feelings and the struggles, marital struggles, at least for us. There's a lot of marriage dynamic changes drastically when the diagnosis comes. Like, it's really hard to just not focus on your child that you want desperately to live a great life. And the partner, at least in our case, and from a lot of people I know, the partner often carries the load of being kind of left behind. My husband and I belong to a church. I have a faith in people, I would say, in people and the kindness of others. So we would go and talk to our reverend. She used to say that she was just getting the car back on the road because we'd kind of go off the track, and then she'd help us get back on. And, individually, I did the same thing. When things were getting a little overwhelming, I'd go and just get some more tools. I think it's like personal development, like Patty said, we're all learning. It's a tough journey. And you have to be prepared to learn and kind of stay up with everything and not let it weigh you down. So just trying to be better than I was the day before, trying to forgive myself when I thought that I didn't do the best maybe that I could have done. I always say to my girls, if it comes from the heart and it's coming from a good place, then whether it's a mistake or not, it's all good. We can work through it, right? So That's pretty much it. Trying to find a place for myself is still a struggle. Right.
Right.
It's still a struggle. I think we all have to learn to do that.
I agree. And I've done therapy. And then I always tell my girls, my foundation's my therapy. I get to talk to CF moms. I get to do so much. And it really does help. And I couldn't do it without you, CF moms. I couldn't do it without my CF community and my CF friends. I can't imagine not having each other. Because like you said, I think, Patty, you said it. I'm sure, Beth, you've said it as well, but we know the same things. We don't even have to speak them. And I've just found it very interesting. And I think in our case, when you talk about relationships too, I think with Joe and I, it ended up being, I took care of the girls completely. Mm-hmm. Not that he wouldn't or couldn't. It's just the way it worked out. I went to every CF clinic. I stayed in the hospital overnight because I wanted to, because I was like, oh, no, I'm the mom. I'm staying. I know. Plus, I'm also the one who'll say, excuse me, you're given to the wrong medication. Yeah. Where my husband, God love him, he just won't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot of that as well, right? Figuring out our roles.
Yeah. And I did the same thing. It was almost, and it wasn't even intentional. It's just my first baby, it was the same thing though. He couldn't change the diaper right. You know what I mean? I think, right. What I tell new moms, that just new moms, no CF moms, it's sometimes you got to let him do it his way. As long as it's not harming them, let him do it his way. But with the CF, it's so important, and everything has to be
Right.
so precise that it was like I was the only one that could do it. So it's like, you can take care of everything else. I got this, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
Yeah. And I went down to working part-time from full-time, but then I was working morning drives. So I was gone from 4 a.m. to noon. So Joe was getting them to school, putting their hair in high ponytails. And to this day, they still talk about how fun it was, Dad getting them to school. It is interesting. We have so much to talk about before this first podcast is over. So I wanted to get to a couple more things. As we're talking, I know we want input from other CF moms about what we talk about and who we bring in. But when the CF modulators first came out, what did that mean to your kids?
Very, very hopeful. And it's the fruit of a whole lot of science that we've been pouring our hearts into for many years. However, as you may well know, we do not have the access to the modulators that we are lobbying very, very hard for. And I'm going to defer to Beth on this because, Beth, you were right on the front line with lobbying for Maddie. So please talk about that. But let me just say that I cannot wait to see what my awesome son can do that's even more awesome, because he's run a half marathon. He's got a couple of degrees. He's got a wonderful life. Holy mackerel. Just look out when those modulators are actually available. How awesome is that?
from the time of diagnosis, I've always been a half full, cup full. And I was ready to do this until there's a cure. And so we're still not there. We have some amazing treatments right now in the name of CF modulators. But in my opinion, we're still not there. The modulators don't cover all the CF patients, and that's what our goal is. We don't want anybody left behind. And I'm not prepared to let that happen. I will keep working. Fortunately, Maddie, despite having a very rare form of CF, she's a G551D, she was very fortunate that the first modulator fit her. She was one of the few that was going to be able to take this and have these changes and this amazing life. So we did the trial. Everything changed. Like I remember she was, I think, 10 or 11, and she said, "Mom, I can breathe through my nose." You know, these are things you aren't even aware of.
Right.
You're like, I knew she had headaches every single day, but I didn't realize that she wasn't able to breathe through her nose, right? So it was just the door opening, and then I kept hoping that everybody else would get the same. And that's why I stayed in the game, fighting along as other modulators that would fit other genes came along. And it's a huge change, and it's making an amazing difference in the lives of patients that have access. We're still fighting in Canada to get access. However, it's not the end, because we need a cure, right? We need something that's going to fit everybody.
Right.
But it's certainly amazing. The gene was discovered in 1989 at Sick Kids. So, we didn't think it would take us that long to get here, but we're there, and we're seeing people living lives they probably never thought they would have. So it's a huge celebration.
It is huge, and it works. One of the modulators works for one of my daughters and not the other. So I agree with you. I'm very much looking forward to another modulator, CF modulator, that will work for the entire population, and hopefully in different forms, like some pills, some inhaled, different means of taking it.
And from the time that Devin was very little, I always told him that parts of the cure are here now. When they enteric coated the enzymes, for instance, and the breathing techniques and all of those kinds of things, the improved antibiotics have been part of the cure. And we always just talked about, and it's your job with our help to be healthy enough to receive each of these as they come along. And he kind of went along with that. And I really believe that there's been just a tremendous gift of research that has come along in increments that our people have been able to benefit from. We just need to cross some more finish lines to finish the job.
And I think you are wrapping this up very nicely. We have zoomed through this podcast, but I wanted to end on just what you're saying. new moms today that have their kids diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, it's so different. And when my daughter, my oldest, is 26, so the enzymes were already coded, right? So you were talking about them not. And one thing I find, even with a CF mom I was just talking to who has a 3-year-old, everybody can relate to, what'd you put enzymes in when they were little? Applesauce. Everybody used applesauce, right? Yeah. So today, if a CF mom, if they're listening, what advice do you have, when we remember and look back at when our kids were first diagnosed? Like, what do you say to them right away that they need to know to stay strong and get started?
Just let's live our life and make sure to do the best you can to follow the rules that make you feel healthier. So we really wanted to make sure that eating was fun and playing was fun, and that it was part of the physio and all of those kinds of things that make it so that children want to be compliant. And then we hope and pray for the very best.
I think that there's never been more hope for a CF diagnosis than there is right now. The things that are happening today in science, they were kind of like an imaginary dream back at the time of the diagnosis for our children. And they're here now and they're happening and we're seeing people do amazing. And it's only the beginning. So I would say embrace your child, understand, make peace with that disease because it's part of them and they're going to have a fabulous life. Enjoy them. There's good days, there's bad days, roll with it and be happy and enjoy that child. Like, I don't think there's a better time. Not that there's a great time for CF, but if you're going to have that diagnosis, things are looking really good for a wonderful future, long future for children these days.
Yeah, there is a lot of hope. And I would say, tell them the truth, age appropriate, about the disease. I found that to be extremely helpful with my girls about everything. It just gave them information so they weren't thinking crazy things in their heads or wondering horribly, about, am I going to die tomorrow? Things like that. So that's one of the biggest things I would say, just like when you're educating them about the colors, this is red, this is blue. Oh, and you have CF, just bringing it in from the beginning as they grow up. Well, we all want this podcast to just blossom with guests and CF moms. So thanks to everybody for listening, and we'll be back again soon.
We are the CF Mom Tribe.
The music in this podcast is from Mark Cotterill of the UK, an artist who happens to have cystic fibrosis. No information contained in this podcast should be considered medical advice. Medical advice can only come from your CF physician. To learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, check them out online at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, the science of possibility, as well as the Ford Motor Company Fund. Get new episodes of our podcast as soon as they come out. Follow the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast in Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Patience tested, waiting for your call.